Hi, it's Simkray here, and today I thought it would be fun to explain my actual process behind making webcomics. It's changed a lot over the years as I've learnt new things, so hopefully you'll find something here useful. Anyway, let's get started. Personally, I like to start with a simple concept or theme, and then build onto it by adding more later. Ideally, I like to be able to sum up my comic in one word or a phrase. For example, for my comic Not Another Cliche, my starting concept was virtual reality, which changed to virtual art university as I developed my world, script, and characters. It's important not to just settle for the first thing that pops into your head. Instead, see what you can add, take away, and edit to make your story more interesting and stand out from similar ones. I like to answer a series of questions to help focus and develop my concepts further. But here are some examples of some questions you can answer for your own comic. What is the main genre of your story? What other genres can you cross with it to make it more interesting? What kind of tone do you want your story to have? Will there be any humor? And does there need to be any humor? What type of reaction or feeling do you want to invoke in people when they read your story? What lessons will people learn from your story? Has the concept of your story been written before? If so, by who? And what twists can you add to make your story stand out? What can you learn from similar stories as yours? What can you do to play with people's expectations of your concept? What year is your story set in? Roughly, how do you want your story to end? How will people be able to relate to the protagonist? Or, what particular audience do you want to be able to relate to your protagonist? Is there something special about them? And is it a secret? What is the main goal you want your protagonist to achieve by the end of the story? What physical ailments or handicaps can you add to make your protagonist more interesting? What motivates the protagonist into continuing to reach their goal? What kind of challenges, if any, will the protagonist face as a direct result of your story's concept? What kind of struggles can you add to the protagonist's journey? What gender, race, nationality is your protagonist, and is that important to the story? Does your protagonist have any friends, family, or pets? Who is the supporting cast? Is there a love interest? If so, who? Does your story need a villain or an antagonist? Do they need a backstory to help people relate to them? How bad is your villain or antagonist? For example, do they burn whole cities to the ground and murder women and children? Or do they have morals? What kind of atmosphere does the villain or antagonist make when they enter a room? Why should anyone care about them? As someone who has dyslexia, my scripts are very basic since I know I'll be physically illustrating them later, so I only write what's necessary for me to remember, as I like to have the freedom to add and change things when designing things later on. For the script itself, the main important things I like to focus on are the dialogue, plot, and rough scene descriptions. Here is an example from the first scene in my comic, Not Another Cliche, Chapter 1, Amateur. Scene: woods, fantasy, or otherworldly look to it. No natural colors, probably purple. Sky is running away from a monster. She ends up running into a tree branch and falling over as the monster catches up with her. Spooky. Sky commentary. So you're probably thinking, I don't remember this happening in Alice in Wonderland. Well, that or, what did I possibly do to tick off that furry? The short answer is, I'm not entirely sure. And believe me, I know how dumb that sounds, but the truth is, I don't even know where the heck I am. I don't like to limit myself by my script. For me, it's only a rough guideline. So if I end up coming up with something better while I'm making the pages and want to change something, then I will. For actually writing my script, I like to use a version of the 7-point method, which I simplified to make it easier for myself, but perhaps I'll talk about that in another video. Before making any pages, I like to get some of the designs prepped so I can reference them while making the pages later. It always saves me a lot of time so I don't have to panic and come up with something on the spot. Some things I like to have prepared are character sheets, prop designs like weapons, items, bags, and magic, set designs for rooms, environments, and buildings, and general concept art. Obviously, it's way too much to prepare everything in advance, especially if certain things won't show up in your first few chapters, so I usually only prep things before the specific chapter I'm working on. I started using Clip Studio Paint during making chapter 3 of my comic, which has sped up my process a lot more as Clip Studio has a lot of features that are specifically aimed towards making comics. So I can work on a group of pages at the same time and switch between pages a lot faster as they are all grouped together. When it comes to sketching and thumbnailing, personally I prefer to just sketch out each page as the actual page's size, rather than using the small thumbnail method, since for me it saves a lot of time so I don't have to resize everything later. Instead, I just zoom out of the pages as I'm sketching so I can work fast, since at this point I'm just trying to get the overall idea across. Normally I'll do about 2 sketches before the final line art, where the first will just be super rough or stickmen as I'm just trying to illustrate my script, and the second will be more on model so it makes ink in faster. I've also made a bunch of custom brushes for backgrounds to make things easier for myself. I would definitely recommend making custom brushes for your own comic if you have a unique style, as it will save you a lot of time later on. Before, I used to draw literally every single stone and pebble in the background, which takes up a lot of time that the average reader probably isn't going to care that much about, in all honesty. So instead I made some custom pebble brushes which I can just manipulate the perspective of and change some of the colors, and done. Work smarter, not harder. There are some brushes you can download from Clip Studio, and there are some people who constantly make new things all the time, so check that out too. I'll probably get around to making a brush pack sometime soon, so you should probably subscribe to my mailing list if you want to be updated about that. But anyway, for bigger backgrounds and establishing shots, I like to make separate illustrations that are easy to reuse and tweak for multiple panels if I need to. The trick here is to make the whole illustration super detailed so you can focus on a smaller part of it in different panels. That way, that one detailed drawing can be used in multiple panels, but I would say only do this if it fits the flow of your story. For example, I like to use this trick for characters who are talking for more than one panel, as it gives the reader a little break and reminds them of the setting. So for my webcomic, I prefer to make it with a traditional comic/manga layout first, and then edit the panels to fit a webcomic layout. This way, if I ever want to print my comic, I'll have less hassle trying to fit everything within a page. When editing to a webcomic format, you have to be aware that you will need to resize your text and possibly reduce some text bubbles, since webcomics need to have a bigger text size for easier readability, as a lot of people will be using their phones to read it. Remember to space out your panels in a way that keeps the pace throughout each episode. I think Webtoons recommends having at least 30 to 60 panels per episode every week, but as someone who can't work on their comic full time due to other commitments, don't feel bad if you can't keep up with that. Instead, just work on making a bulk of pages before uploading them, and let people know when you'll be uploading on social media before the day of the upload. I think people tend to be more understanding if they know what's going on and when they can expect to see updates from you. I personally try to update at least once a month if I can, but I upload a month in advance to Patreon, so they're always ahead by at least 1 to 2 episodes. I also try to leave each episode on a mystery or cliffhanger, which will hopefully keep readers interested enough to come back for the next episode. So sometimes I'll make certain episodes longer just so it'll end at a more interesting part. I try to avoid ending an episode in the middle of a conversation, since it will break the flow of the overall episode. Ideally, I want the reader to be able to pick up where they left off from, so they don't have to go and reread the last episode. Another tip is, I would advise making a comic buffer before uploading your comic though. Try to work out the average amount of pages you will post per week or month and double it. So for example, if you're making and posting 3 to 4 pages per month, then you'll need to make at least 6 to 8 pages before posting. If you can make more than that, that's even better, but having a buffer is good, because if something happens to you, like you get sick or you feel demotivated or something else, then you can at least rest for a few days without having to panic. So I'm not an expert by any means, but there are some things you can do to promote your comic. Personally, I don't like being that person that randomly posts a link to my comic on other people's pages without a prompt, especially if I don't know you and you've never talked to me before that point. It just seems really weird. don't do that. Plus, it's kinda unlikely that you're going to know what that person likes to read. I'm personally really picky about comics, and I like stories that are either fantasy related, spooky, has a black main character, or a unique art style that's preferably fully colored, but other readers will probably have different requirements. So what's the best way to let people know about your comic without pestering them? I hear you ask. Have a good icon image. Hear me out. You need an icon image that gives the reader some kind of idea of what kind of story your comic is about. Try to avoid just having the title of your comic for the icon, even if it looks really good, because the title only tells the reader what the name of your story is, which is normally written under the icon anyway, so it's pointless. Don't do it. It's a waste, okay? Just don't do that. Try not to use your side characters to represent your comic either, especially if they are only in one episode. There's nothing worse than clicking on an icon because of an interesting looking character and then never seeing them until like the last chapter. Like, I wanted to see your beautiful face, but you're not here. Where did you go? Come back. Instead, I use my main character in my icon because she's the most important character and the one the readers will see the most. She also has an interesting expression, you can clearly see my art style, and it gives off the impression that it might be a little, weird? Possibly even funny, hopefully. I personally try to avoid having characters with a blank expression or just looking pretty for the icon because that doesn't really say anything about them and you want to make a good impression, okay? If your comic is literally about fashion and serving face, then feel free to ignore me and have your characters looking pretty. But if your comic is a comedy, make your icon funny. If it's about fantasy, include something fantasy related. But don't cram too much into your icon since it's only small and people won't be able to see everything anyway. I like to add my title logo to the banner and have an action shot with more characters to show their personality. Tapas used to let you display your banner art, but they kind of took that feature away recently. I don't know if they're gonna be bringing it back anytime soon. I really hope they do because I spend a lot of time on my banner and they just bring it away. It's not fun. Additionally, Tapas actually has a pretty good forum where there are frequent promos, tips, advice, and more. So you should go check that out. Links will be in the description. And I'm pretty sure you know, but it doesn't hurt to let your Instagram, Twitter, and other socials know about your comic too. Try to make a post every time you have a new upload so people know to go and check it out. Sounds obvious, but they might not know if you never mention it. Anyway, that's all the tips I have for now. If you found any of this helpful, then consider liking this video. Bye!